Good morning everyone, Mr. Mitchell here. Welcome to week 1 of your maths homework if you're year 10, and if you're dipping into this as year 11s, obviously this is a little bit of revision as well. Just to introduce what we're doing here, each week, excuse me, we are going to be building on, revisiting some learning which we have previously done. The idea of it is that we're going to be covering work that we have done some weeks previously, just to keep it fresh in our minds. Essentially as a bit of a revision, because if we just keep these things just a little tiny piece each week, it's much more likely to stick with us. So me and the other Mr. Mitchell will be producing these videos the intention is a weekly basis. Don't necessarily hold us to that, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily work out that way. But the plan is to do these on a weekly basis. And it will do two things. It will give you the opportunity to do that little bit of additional homework. But secondly, by doing it this way, where we're actually giving a taught lesson, it will give those who may be able to support you at home an idea as to how we teach these things so that we are consistent. So I'm going to dive straight into it. This week, we're just going to cover some stuff that we've previously done on algebra. Not going to talk a huge amount about algebra, just to say that algebra can initially look really scary, because all of a sudden the questions look very different to what we previously have done, because we start introducing letters. At its simplest, the letter is simply to represent a number where we do not know what that number is. So if you can imagine a big box of tissues, and I was to say to you how many tissues are there in that box, you won't know. But that doesn't mean there isn't a number. So we might use the letter T to say we know there are a number of tissues there, we just don't know what that number is. So at its simplest, algebra is no more difficult than that. It's just a number where we do not yet know what that number is. And that's worth remembering, because as I say, the questions can start to look quite scary, but actually, if we just keep that in mind, it will help us. First thing we are going to look at will be indices. Excuse me. The main two that we need to remember when it comes to indices are square and cubed numbers. Okay, square numbers, they are called squares because this little 2 up here is our index. It represents a square number, and basically it means you multiply the number by itself. So if we were to look at 2 squared, 2 times 2, it makes a square. That's why it's called a square number. Cube numbers would be 2 times 2 times 2. So we have to multiply by itself 3 times. The biggest mistake people will make on this is they will look at this and they'll think that means 2 times 3. It doesn't. It means 2 times 2 times 2. So for example, if we have got 4 squared, that means 4 times 4. Okay? 4 times 4, which will give us 16. If we've got 3 cubed, in fact that's a really bad example, let's do 4 cubed, that will mean 4 times 4 times 4. Well, 4 times 4 will give us 16, 16 times 4 will give us 64, okay? That's kind of the basics, and they're things that we just need to remember. We just need to remember what these little tiny symbols mean, okay? They are the main indices that we'll use. You might also get something that says something like 5 to the power of 7. It's unlikely, but you might. That just means the same thing. That just means 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. But these are the main ones that we need to remember. Now we need to go a little bit deeper than that. Excuse me, let me just find a blank bit of space, because you're likely to end up with questions that say things like 5 cubed plus 3 squared. In order to answer something like that, first of all, you need to work out what 5 cubed equals, and then add that answer to whatever the answer is to 3 squared, okay? That's all I'm going to do in terms of indices, because we then build onto other things using indices. The second thing we're going to look at is going to be bidmas. You all remember this, those of you who are in my lesson anyway, because we often do this as part of our retrieval practice. Bidmas basically stands for brackets, indices, division, multiplication, addition and subtraction. And it's the order in which we do more complex sums, but there is an additional little bit of complexity really. in that division and multiplication can swap round depending on what order they come in the actual sum, and so can addition and subtraction. Okay, they can also swap round. What does that actually mean? Well, let's do a couple of examples. I've got a fairly straightforward example here. 5 plus 8 times 3. Now, for your parents and carers who maybe haven't been at school for a little while, they look at 5 plus 8 and they think, well, 5 plus 8 is 13, 13 times 3 is 39, and they would be wrong, okay? Because they're not using the laws of bidmas. Bidmas tells us the order in which we need to complete this sum. And there's something that I want you all to do, and I'll show you why in a moment. As we work through, are there any brackets in this question? No. Are there any indices? No. Is there any division or multiplication? Well, yes, there is. We've got 8 times 3. 8 times 3 is 24, and I want us to make sure we write that down and then write the rest of the question around it. Now we're down to, is there any more division or multiplication? No. Is there any addition or subtraction? Yes, there is. 5 plus 24 will give us 29. And that becomes our answer, okay? This step here about rewriting the question becomes really important because a lot of us are going to be doing our GCSEs. These questions will get a little bit tougher and you're not going to be able to hold all of this information in your head. So I'm going to go to a really extreme example, and the only reason I'm going to do that is just to show you why it's important that we rewrite the question. So 8 minus 2 times 7 plus 6 squared divided by 12. Big mess. Looks terrifying, is terrifying if we look at it in its entirety. But what we've got here is a series of little teeny tiny sums, all of which we can do as long as we remember to rewrite the question. So the first thing is, are there any brackets? Well, yes, there are. Okay, we can all do 8 take away 2, right? So 8 take away 2 gives us 6. Then we rewrite the rest of the question. Any more brackets? No. Are there any indices? Well, we've just learnt about those, haven't we? Yes, there are. We've got 6 squared, which means 6 times 2. Except it doesn't, does it? It means 6 times 6. We multiply the number by itself, which gives us 36. And then we rewrite the question. Is there any, are there any more indices? No. Is there any division or multiplication? Yes, there is. There's both. So we have to do whatever comes first in the question. In this instance, the multiplication comes first. 6 times 7 gives us 42. And then we rewrite the rest of the question. So you can see what we've actually got here is just a really complex looking sum, which is just broken down into little sums that we can all do. Is there any more division or multiplication? Yes, there is. 36 divided by 12, which gives us 3. And then we rewrite the question. And finally, 42 plus 3 equals 45. Okay? So by rewriting the question and tackling one little bit at a time, we can complete really impressive looking and complex sums like that. Okay? There's going to be some bidmas questions attached. Obviously, any questions that you might have for me, come and see me in class. And the final thing we're going to look at is what we call substitution. Now, substitution is perhaps a little bit like bidmas in that it looks really scary, but I think it's easier. The questions will present themselves in a way that make you think, oh, no idea. But actually, substitution, think about football, it's just swapping one thing in for another. Okay? And generally speaking, you're given all of the information you need on the page. So we just have to look at what we're being told. So here it says, if x is worth 2 and y is worth 5, evaluate, and they'll use big words like that, but it just means work out x plus 7. What does that mean? It's actually easy. It tells us up here, x is worth 2. So the question just becomes 2 plus 7. That's all we have to do. And we can all work that out. Again, it really helps to rewrite the question. So have a look at another one. X squared plus y. Well, x squared just means 2 times 2, which is 4. And y is worth 5. Sorry, plus 5. Which again gives us 9. Didn't plan that, that's just coincidence. Okay? Look down at this one. 3x. Now here's something you're just going to have to remember. When you've got a number and a letter next to each other, that always means you multiply them. Okay? You just have to remember that. There's no trick behind that. You just have to remember that a number and a letter means multiply. So this means 3 times x. Well, 3x is worth 2, so that means 3 times 2, which is 6. Y squared, y is 5, so it's 5 times 5. So 6 plus 25, which gives us 31. So this is an example of something which looks much harder and much scarier than it actually is. Obviously the sums do get a little bit more complicated, but at its basic source, that's what substitution is, okay? Going to leave it at that for the moment. What we're going to do over the course of the weeks is build up on this. So next week we'll probably give you one more bidmas question, one more substitution question, and we're just going to keep building and building and building, and that's how we're going to make this stuff stick, okay? Good luck. Any questions, give me a shout, and we'll see you next week.